It began with the small things, the kind of microscopic shifts in the atmosphere that you only notice when you have spent half a decade breathing the same air as another person. It was not a scream or a slammed door. It was the way Elena stopped asking how my day went before she had already turned her back to walk into the kitchen. It was the way her phone, once a shared tool for music or maps, suddenly became a guarded vault, always flipped face down on the granite countertop. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the city was finally beginning to grate on my nerves, but the instinct remained. It was a low-frequency hum in the back of my mind that refused to be silenced, a vibration that told me the foundation of my life was beginning to crack. We had been married for 5 years, a milestone that felt both like a lifetime and a heartbeat. Our life in the quiet suburb of Fairhaven was built on the steady, rhythmic pulse of routine. Every morning, I would grind the coffee beans while she read the news. And every Friday, we would order from the same Italian place on 4th Street. We had a shared language of inside jokes and a shorthand for our future plans. Or so I thought. We had survived the early struggles of our careers and the renovation of our small cottage, and I believed we had reached a plateau of comfortable stability. Our marriage was the one thing I felt I could rely on in a world that was constantly changing and increasingly unpredictable. Then, the rhythm changed. The shifts were subtle at first, like a song losing its tempo by a fraction of a second. Elena started working late, which was not unusual for her role in marketing, but the excuses felt rehearsed. She would come home smelling of a perfume I had never purchased for her, a sharp, floral scent that felt aggressive against the familiar smell of our home. When I reached for her hand during our Friday dinners, she would find a reason to pick up her napkin or adjust her glass. The emotional distance between us grew from a small gap into a vast, echoing canyon that I did not know how to bridge. I felt like a ghost haunting the hallways of my own house, watching the woman I loved drift further and further away into a world I was no longer invited to inhabit. The decision to seek the truth did not come from a place of malice, but from a desperate need for oxygen. Living in the vacuum of her lies was suffocating me, and I reached a point where any truth, no matter how devastating, was better than the quiet agony of uncertainty. I remember sitting in my car in the driveway for an hour, staring at the glowing screen of my tablet. I had synced our shared location settings months ago for a hiking trip, a detail she had clearly forgotten. I watched the little blue dot that represented her phone move across the map, tracing a path that led far away from the office she claimed to be working in. It came to a stop in a part of the city we never visited, a neighborhood of brick apartments and narrow one-way streets. The drive to the north end felt like a descent into a dream state. The rain was a light mist that blurred the streetlights, turning the city into a smear of yellow and gray. I found the building easily, a nondescript 3-story structure with a rusting fire escape and a heavy wooden door. Her car was parked half a block away, tilted slightly against the curb, as if she had been in a hurry to get inside. I sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could have turned around and gone home, could have lived in the lie for another month or another year, but the shadow of the man I used to be wouldn't let me. I stepped out into the damp air and walked toward the entrance. The lobby smelled of stale tobacco and old wood. I looked at the directory, my eyes scanning the names until I saw a blank space next to number 3B. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my chest, beating against my ribs with a violence that made me lightheaded. I took the stairs because the elevator felt too slow and too loud. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the gravity of the building were trying to pull me back down to the safety of my ignorance. I reached the third floor and stood in front of the door marked 3B, the numbers slightly crooked and peeling. I did not have to knock long. The door opened, and for a split second, the world went completely silent. Elena stood there, wearing a silk robe I had given her for our last anniversary. Behind her, a man I had never seen before, a tall man with tired eyes and a glass of bourbon in his hand, was sitting on the edge of a velvet sofa. The expression on Elena's face was not one of guilt, but of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the face of someone who had been caught in a landslide and was waiting for the ground to stop moving. I looked past her at the room, seeing the scattered shoes and the half-empty wine glasses, and the reality of her double life hit me with the force of a physical blow. Then came the excuses, the predictable torrent of words that people use to try and stitch a shattered mirror back together. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was just confused, Julian. We were just talking. I didn't know how to tell you that I was unhappy." She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back as if her skin were made of fire. The man in the background stood up, looking uncomfortable, murmuring something about leaving, but I didn't care about him. He was just a symptom of a much deeper disease. I listened to her talk for a few minutes, watching the way her mouth moved, and suddenly, the words didn't matter anymore. The lies had become so dense that the truth couldn't breathe. In that moment, a strange clarity washed over me. The rage I expected to feel was replaced by a cold, sharp peace. I realized that the woman standing in front of me was a stranger wearing my wife's face. The marriage I had been trying so hard to save had ended months, perhaps years ago. I wasn't losing anything that hadn't already been discarded. I looked at the man, then back at Elena, and I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the burden of maintaining the deception. I realized I didn't want to fight, and I didn't want to hear her justifications. I simply turned around and walked back toward the stairs. I heard her call my name once, but I didn't stop. The walk back to the car was the longest journey of my life. The rain had picked up, cooling the heat in my face and washing away the lingering scent of that floral perfume. As I pulled away from the curb, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It was a heavy, painful weight, the kind that leaves bruises, but it was gone. I drove through the city, watching the people under their umbrellas and the cars splashing through puddles, and I felt like I was seeing the world for the first time in years. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by the hard, jagged edge of the truth. It was a brutal gift, but it was a gift nonetheless. I spent the next few hours driving aimlessly, watching the sun begin to bleed through the clouds in the east. By the time I reached our house in Fairhaven, the light was gray and honest. I went inside and began to pack a bag, moving with a calm, deliberate speed. I didn't look at the photos on the mantel or the half-finished book on her nightstand. I focused on the essentials: clothes, my passport, the things that were truly mine. The closure I had been seeking wasn't in a conversation or an apology. It was in the simple act of leaving. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me, leaving the key under the mat where we had always kept it. The truth had been a terrifying thing to chase, but now that I had caught it, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known was possible. The future was a blank, terrifying expanse, but it was mine again. I started the engine and drove toward the highway, not looking back at the house or the life we had built. I was no longer a ghost in my own home. I was a man, moving forward into the light of a new day, carrying nothing but the truth and the quiet strength it had given me to finally walk away. The story of us was over, and as painful as that was, I was finally ready to start writing the story of me.